Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Ron, for hosting this. My name is Jay Kumar. I'm a cloud solution architect with Microsoft. I primarily focus on the infrastructure side of the house. That means I pretty much work on compute storage, networking, management, framework level stuff, things like that. So with that, in today's session, we are going to cover around mostly around hybrid connectivity options, and we also will take a comprehensive and a multi-dimensional approach to hybrid across on-premises, other clouds, Azure, and edge locations and things like that. And we'll also extend the Azure management capabilities and services across the board. So the goal is to have a consistent and a seamless experience when we deal with diverse environments and bring all these management options together in a single pane of glass. That's what we are looking for from an Azure hybrid experience point of view. So with that, let me get started here. Going to the next slide here. So it is needless to say that today's environment is very complex. We have seen exponential growth in many areas. Companies have thousands and thousands of servers on premises, in cloud, in edge locations sometimes, and things like that. And they have different types of hardware, heterogeneous type environments. They have applications, they have modern applications, they have legacy applications, all these kinds of things. And there is also always companies do this kind of a forward-looking approach where they wanted to rationalize and then bring more, advanced and latest and greatest tools and technologies to their portfolio. So that's what is happening. And with all these things, hybrid is the way to go. Basically, when you look at any Azure or any cloud adoption, we are not thinking about ditching everything on premises and going everything in the cloud. There is going to be some footprint that is going to be available in all these locations. So we just need to play with all that. So with that, what are the type of hybrid use cases you usually see? We see that the applications are running around in different locations, different environments, and across hybrid locations. So this is again when you wanted to have modern applications, like you may not have the capability on premises. You may have a certain stack of things which does not support the capabilities that cloud provides. So you may want to put the modern applications in cloud, but then it also means that some of the backend data sources or things like that still reside on premises. So you need to integrate these things, and similar things with the data as well. You have analytics and data across a variety of things, and you wanted to bring all these things together. With the hybrid architecture, there also a need for hybrid networking, which means you will have to extend your on-premises networking into cloud, and then make sure that your local area network is actually extended towards some other clouds and other locations, things like that. The next one is identity. So with cloud-based approach, in the olden days, we used to do identities. When we think about security, we always thought about layered security. Basically, you have a perimeter network, you have a control domain, you have a secure domain, you have internet domain, all kinds of domains where actually you just isolate, and that's still valid. But then, with the advent of cloud, we have several systems running across everywhere. Like you have systems running on premises, in Azure, in other sources. So basically, identity becomes the single point where we identify the actual users. Basically, they have single sign-on relationship with everything, and making sure that the single identity is used across all these things, and making sure that the controls and are put across all that on that identity is very important. So identity overlays on top of that. So identity is the new way of security with the zero trust model as well. So that's another thing that I wanted to highlight. And then obviously security and management, also hybrid use cases that we'll cover a little bit. Coming to the next slide here. If you look at how these things are working together, let's say you have on-premises. On-premises, you'll run your own systems, and it can be supplemented using some of the core, capabilities that we provide, such as Azure Stack, and this is bringing Azure on premises, running some of the capabilities that Azure provides in your own environment. So we'll talk about some of those options, and then you could maybe connect it with an edge location. The edge location is not really an Azure region, but an edge location is very close to the. There are multiple point of presence locations all over the United States and other continents. So basically, the edge locations, we host certain connectivity options. For example, some of the one of the example is like the Azure front door, where it's a global load balancer which is in the edge, so that it is reachable to the customer as soon as possible, and then it actually from the edge it actually traverses through the Azure Fabric. So the edge locations also provide certain capabilities, and then you may be using multi-cloud, and then you will have all these things stitched together in your portfolio. So how do you manage all these things? If you look at the ways you are doing things, there may be different tool sets as well. You may be using different tools in on-premises for management and monitoring. And in Azure, you may be using Azure tools. In AWS, you may be using their own tools. So, how do we have a common visibility into all these things? That's where the Azure Arc comes into the picture. Azure Arc actually provides a common layer on top of all these things, and it actually brings in all the information from all these sources, and then gives you the policy enforcement and also the management options on top of all these things. That's what Azure Arc does. And that way you can actually centralize your tooling and also get rid of some of the legacy tool sets and bring more unified approach in terms of your management. And also with this kind of approach, it also brings in a lot of visibility into all these environments. It's a single source where you can actually go and look at all these things. That's the one of the things that we actually provide with Azure Arc. So now let's look at what is a hybrid cloud. A hybrid cloud, as we actually just talked about, it could be a combination of things. An on-premises private cloud, and then you can have Azure, and then you can have another cloud. So hybrid cloud, in essence, is a networking, compute, storage, app services, and what you name it, whatever it is, and then all these services in disparate locations and environments. We want to combine them together and then operate as a single entity. That's what a hybrid cloud means, and it's a service that actually encompasses all these things in unison. So that's where this hybrid cloud approach comes up, and then we actually provide the tool set and the capabilities to enable that kind of an approach. So let's look at the networking from a big picture point of view. So whenever you are hosting something in Azure, and you might have already heard about the virtual network concept. What it means is you have, if you look at your on-premises environment, you have a local area network, and then a local area network is a set of private IP addresses, a range of addresses that is local to you. And these addresses will also be shared. Maybe there is intersection between these addresses with my neighbor. Somebody else is using the same thing. But then beyond the point, there is an entry point that's outside that is internet. So from there, it's only a single point of entry. That's a public entry, public IP address that's actually used for connectivity into that. It's like going into your your home address and then the rooms inside the home, things like that. So basically, when you bring these things into Azure, you are actually extending that range of IP addresses over to Azure, and then you can deploy stuff into Azure, and then that means that these servers appear to be sitting next to your on-premises server. So the way we achieve this is through private network connectivity. That's either through express routes, that is a dedicated private line that you can draw from Azure to on-premises, or it could be a VPN connectivity, which is riding over high-speed internet, but it is a tunnel. That actually means that we are encapsulating or encrypting all these IP addresses and and going through a tunnel. So the tunnel is going through internet, but then the packets going through that are all encrypted even at the address level. So we don't even see that as going towards Azure. So that's the VPN concept, and then you can also connect other clouds into Azure, such using VPN connectivity as well. When internet users like your customers are connecting to Azure, what they do is they come through internet, and you may be exposing a a public endpoint as an application endpoint. So they hit the application to that URL, and it comes there, and then the whole thing happens, transaction happens there, and they get back. But then for management and operations, you actually have a private dedicated line that goes from on-premises to Azure. So that's how the big picture for network looks like. So with that, let's talk about our next slide here. So a couple of things I'm going to cover today is Azure Stack, Azure Arc, and not so much on IoT. We don't have so much time. But we'll cover these two things. And I already mentioned a little bit about Azure Arc. Azure Arc is something that brings management across different environments into a single pane of glass. And then Azure Stack is actually something gives you Azure capabilities at the edge locations or on premises. So basically, in diversifying from basically taking it out of the region and then putting it into closer to your environment. So that's Azure Stack as well. Now let's look at some of those things that Azure Arc provides. So Azure Arc allows you to run data services anywhere. So the Azure Arc is bringing more and more portfolios into that, more and more capabilities into the portfolio. So basically, the first thing that some of the things that provides now, I have not checked the latest list, but maybe this is an ever-expanding thing. You can run Azure data services on premises, and then look at it from Azure as it is Azure data service. You can see, in a cloud environment, you can have PaaS services running in Azure. Azure data services like Azure SQL or some things like that. But let's say you are running a SQL server on premises, and then you want to see this as an Azure managed environment. So Azure Arc extends that and then brings in that capability into Azure, and then you can actually see the same portal experience for those databases. That's where that's what it means by running data anywhere. And so that means management options across environments and adopt cloud practices on premises. You have a policy enforcement that you run for Azure. You can extend that policy into on-premises environments as well. And the same Azure security tools that you can extend into, for example, Azure Sentinel or Azure Security Center, things like that. It's called Defender for Cloud now. Those things can be extended for Azure outside of Azure as well. That's the Azure Arc use case. Now, looking at the Azure Arc system architecture, there is something called Azure Resource Manager in Azure. What it does is, when you interact with Azure in any of these ways, like Azure portal or a command line interface or an SDK, it is sending a command to the Azure Resource Manager. The Resource Manager is in turn turning back and telling some of these resource providers to get things done. Let's say I'm telling the Resource Manager I need a virtual machine, and the Resource Manager actually takes this and requests, and whether it is coming through portal, CLI, the language is not important. It knows what it is, and then it takes it and then does that for you. So when you are doing this for with on-prem and other locations, there is an interface that actually plays with Azure Resource Manager called Azure Arc Resource Provider. So everything is a resource provider. Resource Manager works with the resource provider. The resource provider usually is something that runs within Azure. But then if you are having an on-prem environment, then that's also a resource provider. But Azure should know it is providing something. That's why this resource provider agent is sitting inside that on-prem or wherever it is, and then it is feeding all these things back into Azure. So that's how those data services or Kubernetes services or servers are all visible in Azure using, and it is actually something like a virtual type provider, which is actually giving you that back into Azure. So you see those things and you can manage those things. Obviously, you can also, you cannot do a lot of things like in Azure because you don't have control under the underlying hardware sometimes, but to that certain extent, you can do most of the things. And that's how the capability comes in. And then you can also, this means that the box on the right side you see is around other tools, which are independent of Azure. You may be running your own tools on premises. You can interact with those tools as such into those environments. That is, nobody knows about it because it's not an Azure thing. and it still continues to work like that. So this is the whole architecture of Azure Arc, which you could pretty much use right away for any of the things that you run outside. So next thing is, I think we covered these things, and I'm going to skip over this. It's pretty much organized and governed across environments, at scale, app management, and then run services anywhere. So these are the key customer use cases that you can run using Azure Arc. So let's look at one scenario here. So let's say a financial institution has the servers in corporate data centers, other hosts, and Azure everywhere. And then let's say they are deploying into all these systems using DevOps, other such as their process of deployment is pretty much like in automation, things like that. So at the end of the day, there are zillions of systems running, and we need to have a common look and feel and management of all these. So this is overwhelming sometimes, and who is managing all these things? There could be small teams looking into certain applications, but there is no oversight at the top level. So that's where the Azure Arc comes in. And then, so govern across all your environments. So you have a multi-cloud Azure Arc and data center host Azure Arc, and then the Azure management comes in between. Wherever your asset is, the compliance can be enforced from a central point of view. So that's the use case here. The second thing I would think about is a Kubernetes-based environment. So let's say a retailer is running 100 stores, and then they have all Kubernetes-based deployments. So these deployments may be using different tooling and things like that, and management of all these Kubernetes is going to be, it's localized again. So how do we make it more integrated? So in that situation, what you do is you bring these Kubernetes clusters as a AKS or Azure Kubernetes Service Cluster, and then view them as Azure managed this Kubernetes service. You may not be able to add the new nodes and all that because it is controlled under the cover, but you can manage those. You can shut down containers. You can do, you can actually look at the resource utilization. You can do restarts, all kinds of things. Can be done from Azure itself. When I say Azure, it means it can be portal experience or using automation or CLIs or SDK type interface. So basically, this means that you're bringing them into Azure. So the solution here is again, using Azure Arc, you are actually at scale deployment and at scale management of all these environments. So let's go for the Azure Data Services as well. So the Azure Data Services, again, I mentioned this before. You can run data services outside of Azure and then manage from Azure. So the same situation here. So it can be any hardware, but basically underneath the cover, it is running a containerized version of data services, and then it actually brings back those controls into the Azure side. So this is again the Azure management experience. So for the tools and experiences that we use, our portal, shell, all sorts of things in Azure. And then the Azure Resource Manager is there on top of it, beneath that. And then all the management services like monitoring, update, containers, backup, security center, all these management services will be enabled for on-premises using the Azure Arc. So basically security access, the access and security, inventory and searchability, cataloging, all sorts of things, governance, compliance, all those things will be extended into the portfolio outside of Azure using Azure Arc. So that's the management layer that we talk about. So with that, let's look at the Azure Stack Portfolio. So as I mentioned, Azure Stack Portfolio includes offerings that extend Azure services and capabilities across data centers, remote offices, and edge locations. This portfolio makes it possible to build and run hybrid edge computing applications consistently across different environments and with your choice and flexibility to address diverse workloads. So there are three things that are available. One is called Azure Stack Edge. It's an Azure managed appliance that brings compute, storage, and intelligence to edge. So Azure Edge is Azure own feature or service which is running in Azure Edge locations, and the Azure Stack HCI is an optimized. It's called a hyper-converged solution, which is like we call it data center in a box kind of thing. Is an optimized and a running virtualized applications for on-premises. So it can be run on hardware provided by Microsoft or vendor hardware that is actually certified for that. The Azure Stack Hub is an integrated system that provides the full stack of Azure services. The full stack means there may be some things missing, but the HCI is limited to certain IaaS type solutions, I think, and then the hub is generally like app services and functions and more PaaS related stuff, but it's something that you can actually run like more like an Azure like environment. The hyperconverged is more for IaaS type environments, and it's like a data center in a box type situation. Let's look at a little bit more on this. As I mentioned, the Azure Stack Edge has a hardware accelerated machine that has a machine learning algorithm that and again it has based on the usage pattern, it can actually provide fast response, and how you are interacting with it can actually get more insights and then things like that. And again, it is running within the Azure Edge location, so you don't have to really host it. And the processes, and again, because it is Edge, it actually processes the data closer to the customer and wherever it is available. So it can be if your branch office is closer to location A, then the edge is on near to that, and some other branch may be having a different edge location connected to that. So that's kind of the thing that is coming from the edge. So the point is that you can actually extend your portfolio or like deployment into multiple environments and overall manage them using the single control system. So again, the next one I would say is HCI. So the hyper-converged infrastructure is a IT infrastructure that combines common data center hardware and using locally attached storage devices and stuff like that. So basically, we deliver it into the on-premises environment and you run it, and it connects to Azure for offsite backups and data recovery and all that. So basically, you can run this as if you're running an Azure region, and even if it is not connected to Azure always, but it can do some backups into the Azure when it is online, and then keep sync with that. So basically, this is useful when there is a latency between going into Azure, or there are situations where your performance for the network is not ideal and optimal, and then you wanted to have that kind of an experience. So this same thing for Hub. You could actually go ahead, and I'm not going to, in the interest of time, not going too deep into that, but obviously there are three options you can actually look up, and then see for yourself what are the differences and what those offer. Now let's look at the security posture. The Azure Security Center, but this is an old slide, but it is actually called Defender for Cloud now. So basically, it actually gets all these telemetry from all the usage patterns and the log data, the application logs, system logs, and access logs, how people are interacting with systems, network, compute, all kinds of logs. And then it actually does machine learning on top of that, and then provides you the insights into what security events are happening. And it pretty much gives you a security posture and then gives a score out of all that stuff. And then it will also give recommendations for that. What this means is you can bring the IT operations and the security team together in a single place. And with the Azure Arc on top of that, this can happen everywhere. It's not just only Azure, but inclusive of everything. So that's the security center thing. And then there is also another tool called Sentinel. This is more threat protection type scenario. This is what if kind of scenarios. Like say something happened, and then how do you do forensics on that? How do you prevent it in the future? How do you track this? And it's more like a SOA tool, security orchestration, automation, and response. The other one is called a CM tool, which is security information, something like that. So, so there is, this is more operational. The other one is more policy and compliance level, where you can actually capture things and do it beforehand. And now this Sentinel is actually coupled with the Azure Defender. It gives a full round experience of the security end to end across all the hybrid environments. So again, now the hybrid identity. So one of the things with the Microsoft Azure is that it provides the Azure Active Directory, which has been a single identity provider for several things, including Azure, the Office 365 products, or anything that you wanted to single sign on to other environments using open authentication or all kinds of things that you choose to have. So, and if you are having an on-premises Active Directory, you can sync your directory into Azure using something called Azure AD Connect. And so that means the identities are preserved, and you can actually extend all these into other environments. So if you are, let's say you're running some application in AWS, and then the same user having logged into their on-premises environment has to navigate through their AWS application. The same security credentials will apply because it's a single sign-on provided by Azure Active Directory. So this Active Directory identity provider glues all these things together with a single identity provider, which is one of the key solutions that Microsoft provides as part of the hybrid identity infrastructure. So with that, the next slide I have is integration. I don't know how much time I have.
Hey, Jay, we've got just a few minutes. So if you could summarize some of the key highlights, that would be great.
Yeah. So we just talked about several things. Now I'm just trying to provide some sort of integration capabilities that we have. This is again when you are trying to do integration about when we have in an enterprise, you have so many systems and you want to interconnect all these things to a service bus kind of scenario. There are things that you can do. That's also part of the hybrid connectivity, because you want to connect from on-prem to Azure and Azure to Azure and all kinds of things. So there are things like integration services, or now we call it IPaaS, like integration, platform as a service. So those type of things. And then we have DevOps tools and stuff like that, which actually give seamless deployment experience and operations across everything. And, and then I will talk about a little bit of Azure vWAN, which is also something you could check it out. The virtual WAN connectivity, which actually interconnects everything as a full mesh connectivity. Let's say you have branches, Azure, something else, everything can be fully meshed and connected together. That's the Azure vWAN type scenario, virtual WAN. I think that's pretty much I have. And you can learn more at all these things in azure.com hybrid. And that's pretty much it. Thanks again for listening to me. I hopefully had something out of this. And if any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Jay. I think the key takeaway for all of you out there is the tremendous flexibility that Microsoft provides against the backdrop of an incredibly secure, flexible, and robust systems. But when I was listening to Jay's comments, the common theme is flexibility. We'll work with you. We can support your strategy, be it all in the cloud, be it much more on-prem or some combination thereof, or even across different cloud platforms. That's my key takeaway. Is there anything else you want to add, Jay, before we turn it over to Kirk?
No, really. I think you summarized it very well. And thanks for listening to me. And